In my school, there was a very strange classmate, and his story made a big impact on me. That day, on my way home from school, I saw a bunch of thugs bullying another student. I was curious and wanted to get up close and check it out, but my friend thought such things should not be interfered with, and the person being bullied was the weird friend I wanted to talk about. His name was Faye, and the reason he got bullied was that he was very special. Luckily at the time an adult came and stopped them, or else Faye would have been beaten up. The bullies ran away and left Faye behind. The adult man picked him up and asked him if he was okay. His hair and eyebrows were white. His eyes also weren't black. When we were kids, we thought Faye was a monster. We didn't know what albinism was. Then Faye quietly left. I never heard him complain to anyone, and he didn't have any friends. A few days later, I saw him being bullied again in the alley near the school. This time, it seemed different from the previous bully, so I sneaked a peek. The bully was very angry. He forced Faye to take back his words. Faye must have said something to anger them. But no matter how much he was beaten, Faye still insisted that he saw a ghost walking behind the bully's back. And everyone in the school knew a deadly rumor about Faye. If he saw a shadow following someone, that person would die in a few days. And that happened so many times. What he saw was true, so everyone was afraid of him. The bully was very scared and took out his anger on Faye. He wanted Faye to take back his words. But Faye definitely refused, because what he saw was the truth. Then the kids who went with the bully were afraid that he would kill Faye, so they stopped him. That was probably the last time I saw Faye, and the scary thing happened not long after that. The student who bullied Faye drowned and died while swimming in the river. His family came to school making a fuss, and Faye also dropped out of school and disappeared from there. Later, when I grew up and everyone had their own lives, I heard that Faye had become a magician. That day my girlfriend was sitting in a room to work because she was a screenwriter. She often worked at home. Suddenly she saw something falling outside the window, looking like a shadow. It fell in front of the window, making a very loud noise. She rushed over to open the window to see what happened outside. As soon as she opened the door, my girlfriend saw a hand raised. The scene that followed made her very frightened. A man died outside the window. Maybe he fell from above and hit our clothes drying pole. My girlfriend was very frightened. She called me back immediately and also called the police. After investigating, police said that the dead man lived upstairs and slipped while trying to reach out to clean the window. I thought everything had been resolved well and it had nothing to do with us. The police had already handled it, so we didn't care anymore. That night, my girlfriend was still working on the computer. She continued to see a shadow falling outside the window. It was still the same sound as in the morning, and now my girlfriend was very scared, so she did not dare to open the door anymore. She started to step backwards. Suddenly, outside the window, a man's shadow appeared and stood outside, while this was the 4th floor. She was so scared that her legs were stiff that she couldn't move anymore. The man slowly pulled the door and looked inside. Suddenly, a distorted face with a head tilted to the side as if it was almost broken appeared at the window. He started to stretch and crawled into the house from the window. His body was twisted so scarily. At that time, my girlfriend collapsed on the floor, unable to stand. He finally crawled into the house through the window. His body was like broken bones. Little by little, he crawled closer to my girlfriend. Then he tried to grab her pants as if he wanted to drag her along. Too scared and trying to resist, my girlfriend tried her best to get up to run as fast as possible. Out! She told me about the strange man. At that time, I advised her to stay calm and take me to see what happened. Listening to her tell and looking at her panicky actions, I was nervous too. I opened the room door and started peeking a little bit inside the room. At this point, I was a little more relieved because the room was empty. There was no man like what she said. I began to reassure her. Maybe she was just working and writing too much so that the story or incident haunted her. Maybe she imagined it. But with a panicked expression, she claimed to have seen the dead man in the afternoon. Then I went over to close the window so I could look around outside to see if there was anything. After that, I comforted her. "You must be so obsessed that you looked at it wrong. No one was here at all." However, she insisted that she had seen a ghost. There was no mistake. Seeing that, I both wanted to reassure my lover and at the same time I wanted to find out if it was a ghost or not. I called a friend to ask how to contact Faye and called Faye to my house. Not long after, there was a knock on the door. Faye must have come. He was quick because I just called him about 20 minutes ago. I walked out and opened the door. It was Faye. It had been a long time since I had seen him. He had changed a lot. He looked stronger and more mature, but his special thing was that the skin and hair still were all white. After a few greetings, Faye also asked straight to the point. "Was there a ghost in your house? Let me have a look." I happily invited him inside and introduced my lover. After that, she told Faye the story she encountered herself. Just by looking at it, Faye guessed that she had just encountered something scary because according to Faye, her expression right now was quite bad. Seeing that, I quickly replied that she said she saw a ghost, but I couldn't see it, so I didn't believe it. Hearing that, Faye immediately looked around the house and said that something had intruded here. I still bewilderedly asked what it was, because I couldn't feel or see anything, just listening to the two of them. Faye's expression suddenly turned serious. "That person had targeted your girlfriend. Be careful." At this time, my girlfriend turned to blame me because I did not believe her. Both of them said the same thing, which made me a little embarrassed. And so I came up with a stupid idea that only when I saw it, then I believed there was such a thing in the world. Faye gave me a strange smile and asked me if I was sure I wanted to see it. He would make me content. With a girlfriend by my side, I took a risk and asked Faye to prove what he said. Right now he didn't talk much, just smiled and rummaged through his bag to find something. Quickly, Faye found a small bag that he said was the powder of raw glutinous rice, which could help me see what I wanted to see. After that, Faye went to the door and started smearing the powder all over the window glass. Then he continued to spread the powder all over the floor. That thing finally appeared. That scared me and I couldn't believe my eyes. From the glass door to the floor, full of handprints and footprints like that of a crawling person, just like what my girlfriend told me about. I panicked and asked Faye what to do now and wondered why I couldn't see. Faye calmly replied, "That ghost appeared and scared your lover because she was the last person to see him die." And according to Faye, even when I couldn't see it, it was always there, next to or around me, which worried me a bit. Then Faye took out from his pocket a copper coin tied with a red string and said I should let my girlfriend wear it for a few days. Everything would be fine. I offered to pay Faye to thank him, but he had no intention of taking my money. Seeing that, I sent him downstairs and asked him if he had been doing this all these years. Faye said this was his mission and doing this made him happy. We continued to talk to each other. Faye changed a lot. He always had a smile on his face that looked very ghostly. Faye said, "I was born with some special ability. My teacher discovered this ability of mine and directed me to stick with it." I continued to go with him further because I wanted to talk to him a bit more, but Faye stopped me. He said that if I needed him, I should just call. We said goodbye to each other, but later on, it was true that there were many things I needed his help for. Today myself and my colleague Wang went out drinking together. He rarely invited me out before, so there was definitely something that required my assistance. "Hey you, have something to say?" There was no need to be so polite. Wang began to inquire about me because he heard that I had a special friend who can see and deal with things related to ghosts. When I heard his question, I immediately thought of Faye and speculated that Wang was experiencing spiritual difficulties. He sadly stated that from childhood to adulthood, he always felt he was followed by someone, and the incident had a significant impact on his life now. From a young age, he was able to easily overcome dangers or accidents in an unusual way, and he sensed that there was a woman who always helped him. When he was about 6 years old, he used to go with the children in the village to collect bird eggs from tall trees. When Wang climbed to the nest in the tree, he was overjoyed because he noticed a large number of bird eggs in the nest. Unfortunately, Wang slipped just as he was about to climb down. He fell from a great height, and it was very easy to break a leg or an arm in such a fall. Wang expected to hit the ground hard, but even after all of the eggs had fallen to the ground and broken, Wang still didn't. In a blur, he saw a woman supporting him. After landing, Wang realized that if it hadn't been for the woman's assistance, he would have fallen and hit his head on the rock next to him. In another time, Wang and the children in the village continued to go to the stream to catch fish. The water was moving so fast that he couldn't keep his balance and fell. The water was so fast that Wang was swept into the deep water. His body was weak, so he couldn't do anything but sink. Just when he was about to suffocate from the water, he felt someone touch his back from behind. The hand slowly brought him to the surface, and the person was attempting to save him. He tried to look but couldn't see her face clearly, but he definitely believed that it was the woman from the day before. She was always following and helping him, and then he lived happily and peacefully until he grew up. Things got worse when he had a lover. One day he took his lover home to watch a movie. He had to say goodbye to a few people before, so he hoped it would be well in the time. But as soon as his lover walked into the bathroom, Wang heard his lover scream. He rushed over to the scene and saw her standing in the toilet while covering her face with her hands and her body trembling. He quickly inquired and she panicked and stated that she had seen a ghost in the mirror who was looking at her with an angry expression. She kept pointing her finger at the mirror and saying that there were ghosts, but when he looked at the mirror, he didn't see anything. He took her out and reassured her that it could be because she was overworked or because she was dizzy. However, she didn't stay calm for long. In the night before going to bed, she went to the toilet to wash her face, and then the ghost woman reappeared. She was standing right next to Wang's lover, making her so scared. With a scary, ferocious face and menacing eyes, as if she didn't want anyone to touch her belongings. Because the lover was too scared, she ended her relationship with Wang as well. Soon after, he met another girl, but in the time he didn't want to be involved, so he took the initiative to discuss marriage. One night, While the two of them were sleeping together, something strange occurred. Something suddenly grabbed her ankle and yanked her hard. She was dragged out of bed and immediately fell to the ground, causing her to scream in fear. Wang also awoke unexpectedly and quickly went to her side to see what had happened. She had bruises all over her leg, as if someone had gripped her leg, and the incident occurred a few more times. It made her scared. So she also ended her relationship with Wang. Many strange things caused him to get a headache, and he was perplexed. So he knew I had a special friend and asked me for help. After hearing what Wang said, I was also shocked, and looking at his emaciated appearance, I also felt sorry for him. So I contacted and made an appointment with Faye. On the night Faye and I arrived at the meeting point on time, Wang was already waiting for us at the gate. I introduced Faye to Wang and told him that he was a talented magician. I don't like people calling me teacher or magician. Just call me by my first name, Faye said. On the way up to Wang's house, Faye began to inquire about his childhood, whether he had been sick or had nearly died. He also answered honestly to Faye's questions, saying that when he was 5 years old, he had a serious illness and nearly died. But according to Wang, he was only severely ill for a short period of time, after which he was nearly cured and was now in good health. When Faye heard Wang's statement, he gave a mysterious smile as if he already knew something. When I saw Faye's expression, I knew he had seen something. So I was curious and asked him about it. But he didn't say anything. He just said that he needed to get to Wang's house right away and check it out before making a final decision. Because I was scared after hearing Wang's story, Faye was the first to open the door and enter the house. Looking around the house, Faye said that there was another person living here with Wang. I bewilderedly said that I didn't see anyone. Why did he know that there were other people? Faye looked at me, still with a smile on his face. He asked if I wanted to see the ghost. I didn't dare to respond, but my curiosity wouldn't let me go, so I nodded quietly to Faye. He was rummaging through something in the bag which he always carried with him, and both Wang and I were watching Faye intently. Then he started sprinkling a strange white powder all over the place, and the powder quickly spread and filled the room. It tasted like pepper powder and got into my nose, causing me to sneeze several times. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw a strange scene. Right now, the room in front of my eyes was filled with strange black smoke. It extended from the desk chair to the floor. I panicked and asked Faye. He said that it was the yin left behind by the ghost. There was a ghost in this house. Wang was worried now, and he kept pleading with Faye for assistance. He couldn't continue to live with the strange things. Faye said, I would help you, but you have to tell me the truth. This ghost following you is not natural. With Faye's interrogation, Wang almost didn't understand anything. He said that he didn't know what happened. Since he was a child, he felt someone followed him and protected him. Besides, he didn't know what else. Faye also seemed to understand the problem after hearing Wang's story. He believed that because Wang's mother died too early, she couldn't tell him everything. Faye said, Have you asked your family anything, or if anyone knew about this when you were 5 years old? Then Wang hurriedly took out his phone and called his grandmother. I was curious, how did Faye know that Wang's mother passed away early? Faye said that because his parents died early and Wang was inherently weak in both body and soul, the family must have found someone to protect him. Wang immediately came to tell us after having a call that something happened in the year he was seriously ill. Wang's grandmother said that because of his weak body and serious illness, his mother worried about her child, and she let him marry a ghost girl so that she could follow and protect Wang. Faye said, "You had to marry the ghost because she already considered herself your wife." I felt a bit disgruntled after hearing Faye's statement, because at the time Wang was too young to decide. The adults in the family did it, and now he had to suffer. Could he not have a wife for the rest of his life? Faye stated that it was acceptable for Wang to marry anyone, but he had to first marry her and obtain her consent before marrying another wife. Wang appeared concerned. He wished to remove her from his life, but Faye was on the side of the ghost wife. Faye said that she had followed him all his life. Now he wanted to chase her away. Wang finally decided to marry the ghost wife and asked Faye to assist him with the wedding ceremony. Then Faye chose a date to celebrate the wedding, and in the night, Wang would stick happy words on the bedroom window, but in a white color. Then he would put a mirror next to the bed, lighted 2 white candles on both sides. As long as he could see her next to him, everything would be successful. Wang was a bit scared at first, but by midnight there was still no movement, so he fell asleep. After a while, he felt the surrounding air was cold, so he awoke dreamily. He panicked as soon as he opened his eyes and looked in the mirror. There was a woman lying next to him, and she had to be his ghost wife. He gently and quietly tilted his head back to look. He wanted to see how her appearance was, who had lived with him for such a long time. When he turned around, the bed was completely empty, with no one beside him. However, when he looked back in the mirror, he could clearly see that she was standing right beside him. He gradually became less afraid and looked at her closely. She was very similar to whom he saw when he was a child, and he felt he accepted her from his own heart. Then he fell asleep. A year later, it appeared that the ghost wife agreed to let him marry someone else, and Faye and I were both invited to the wedding. He had gotten used to his life with the ghost wife and living in harmony with her, so his face was no longer as gloomy as it once was. I felt thankful to Faye, since Wang could now live a normal and happy life. And I also didn't forget to joke that Wang was lucky to have both wives. Faye said, "So, did you want a ghost wife? I would make you satisfied." When I heard Faye's statement, I immediately showed fear and refused. But I couldn't stand always having to make a place for the invisible person in my life. And I also felt bothered to have a girlfriend, let alone a ghost wife. The day was fun, so I drank quite a lot. I admired Faye's talent and wanted to work with him again. Faye said, "It's better you forget that idea. I have a lot of contact with yin people, so I won't live long. If you followed me, you would meet the same fate." But I still thought it was too good to be able to help people while earning money. But Faye still firmly disagreed, so we walked home together. After all, I had a better understanding of Faye's life and the world in which he lived. The news about Faye was spreading faster and faster, and there was no one in my company who hadn't heard about it. The following story is about a female colleague of mine. I also made an appointment with Faye to go there and assist my colleague because she was very nice to me in the company. As my admiration for Faye grew, I began speaking to him respectfully. But he didn't like it, so I decided to reduce it as well. And along the way, I briefly discussed the situation of the colleague who needed help. Her name was Wang, and what happened to her son, who had been dazed recently and forgot everything like a lost soul.
Did she try taking him to the hospital?
Faye asked. I informed him that she had attempted to take him to the hospital, but no results so far. When we arrived, I began knocking on the door. She too had heard about Faye through word of mouth. Miss Yang quickly opened the door and welcomed us happily. She then invited us into her home to rest for a while. However, Faye quickly got to the point. He wanted to see the boy, so he asked Yang to call him. Miss Yang turned around as soon as she heard Faye say that and summoned her son. The boy then slowly opened his room door, his face lifeless, his eyes black and his features haggard. He also walked slowly, looked tired, and didn't appear to be an active 10-year-old boy at all. I glanced over at Faye to see what he was up to. Faye was staring at the boy with his pale iris's eyes right away. Finally, Faye believed that the boy had lost his soul due to fear of something.
Please call the boy over. I want to see his hands,
said Faye. Yang was extremely cooperative with us. She motioned the boy to come closer and extended his hand to Faye. Faye rubbed the boy's middle finger a few times. He then asked Yang to recall anything that had recently scared the boy. There'd been so much going on lately that she couldn't remember it all. After thinking for a while, she suddenly remembered that while she and his son were passing through an alley, a dog rushed out, causing both of them to panic. Faye smiled, stood up, and said goodbye to Miss Yang after hearing that. Before leaving, Faye told Miss Yang that he would call her back by 12 o'clock tonight, and that Miss Yang should then open all the doors and call out her son's name. We quickly left after saying goodbye to Miss Yang. I was so excited that I asked Faye what to do next. Faye wanted to visit the alley where the vicious dog terrorized Miss Yang and her son. Following Miss Yang's direction, we found the alley. Sure enough, there was a stray dog inside rummaging through the trash for food, and when it saw us, it bolted. I followed Faye down the dark and cold alley. I looked around nervously, afraid that something would happen by accident. The atmosphere here was quite creepy. There were numerous amounts of ashes on the ground and moldy cakes. Suddenly a breeze appeared out of nowhere, blowing those ash piles into the air. They flew over me, causing me to shiver all over. I dashed up to Faye and exclaimed, "It's so dark and scary in here." Faye laughed and teased me, saying that I was overthinking because nothing out of the ordinary was happening here. I hesitantly asked Faye what to do now. With a devilish grin on his face, Faye said,
"Enough watching this. Come back tonight."
He then left me to my business and suggested to meet each other tonight in front of the supermarket. I took the day off from work because I had nowhere to go, so I sat at the cafe waiting for him. On time, Faye was standing in front of the supermarket, a smile on his face. I was nervous, but I also wanted to go down that alley, so I pleaded with him to hurry up. But when he said he needed to go to the supermarket to get some sweets, I assumed he was hungry. When I came out, my hand was carrying 2 heavy bags containing various types of food and even cigarettes. Because I was curious, I asked him what he planned to do with all of the stuff.
"These are items for the evil spirits that roam around in this area,"
Faye stated. Hearing Faye's response made me feel a lot more nervous. Curiosity piqued my interest, and I expressed my desire to see them as well, to see how they look like. Faye began rummaging through the bag for something. Faye seems to be able to make me see them, even though I thought there was no way. Then Faye took out a small jar containing a blue liquid and placed a few drops on his hand. He then applied it to my eyelids and the center of my forehead. This was a method of opening the eyes of yin and yang, which could assist ordinary people in seeing ghosts. Faye began to teach me some things, such as not talking to them, not trying to touch them, and simply spreading candy while walking. As we progressed deeper into the alley, the cold night air made the space here feel even colder. I did as Faye instructed, scattering the contents of the bag across the ground. As the air started to be colder and colder, I gradually spread the majority of the candy. However, I hadn't experienced anything out of the ordinary as of yet. Suddenly, I heard the sound of snack chewing coming from behind me, which made my heart skip a beat. I couldn't help but return my gaze. Suddenly, a swarm of people appeared behind me, causing me to panic. They were crawling on the ground, picking up the food I had just scattered. The scene was terrifying. Upon closer inspection, they appeared to be hungry ghosts devouring cakes and candies on the ground. Some other ghosts were smoking and chatting with one another. I was so terrified that I turned my face away, refusing to look at them. As I turned around, I almost collided with a man, so I quickly apologized to him. But then I realized that I could easily go through his body. Then he turned to face me, flashing a hideous smile with his head turned upside down. I suddenly remembered what Faye had told me earlier about not talking to these ghosts, but it was too late. He had already rushed over to catch me. At that precise moment, a hand from behind swung rice grains at him. It made him fearful and howl in agony. He bolted and I nearly peed my pants, but I assured Faye that I was fine. When Faye saw that I was fine, he instructed me to call Miss Yang, tell her to open the door and call her son back. At this point, the boy's spirit was sitting on the ground eating cake, so I hurriedly called her to do what Faye instructed. After a few minutes, the boy's spirit appeared to have heard his mother's call and began to stop eating and raise his face. The boy stood up and was about to leave when he was stopped by the ghosts surrounding him. Faye immediately grabbed another handful of rice and splashed it all over them, while scolding that he had fed them full already. These ghosts appeared to be afraid of rice and Faye, so they withdrew. As Faye stood guard, the boy's soul gradually emerged from the alley. Just to be sure, Faye and I escorted him home. We also went home after work done. On the way, I wondered what Faye had ended up putting on my eyes. I was surprised by the answer because that thing was bull steers. I was curious how bull steers could help us see ghosts. Faye appeared to be bored with my silly questions, so he was the first to leave. But I still wondered, how could he get the bull's tears? Before returning home, Faye told me to take a bath with grapefruit leaves because the encounter with the man's spirit today could cause me to be infected with yin. But because I couldn't find grapefruit leaves, I didn't take a bath, which caused my body to ache for a week. Truth is that it's not wise to mess with the devil. At the time, it was Faye's story. He was asked by an acquaintance to expel evil spirits from their son. The boy had been acting strangely lately, and today he had a violent convulsion and attempted suicide. The eyes were filled with veins and blood, and nose and mouth walls were dripping profusely. It appeared to be excruciatingly painful. Faye was holding a coin in his hand and muttering something strange and perplexing at the moment. Then he pressed the coin firmly against the boy's brow and continued to recite the spell. After a while, the boy returned to normal, stopped convulsing, and fell asleep. Faye then told the boy's family that everything was fine and told them something. They were so moved and fired by Faye that they invited him to dinner and sleep over the next day, but Faye declined out of fear of disturbing the host. The boy's father had to see us off because it was still early. We also planned to take a taxi home quickly. However, after a while of walking it began to rain heavily, so we decided to stay in a nearby hotel. Our clothes were soaked, and I even blamed Faye for not knowing it was going to rain today. I even teased Faye, asking if everything was going as planned. Faye said nothing and simply told me to hurry into the hotel.
"You were not my style. Forget the crazy idea,"
Faye said. When we entered, a middle-aged man, most likely the owner, stood up to greet us. "Welcome to our hotel. Please come in." The first thing which drew my attention to him was his limp leg. Faye booked a room with 2 beds after providing personal information. At the point, I heard a child's voice behind me and turned to look. It had to be the owner's son. The only difference was his legs were limp like his father's. The owner began to lead us to check in, and at the same time a child emerged from the inside. And by the way, the boy was also the owner's son, according to the talk between 2 of them. And the first child was the eldest brother, while the one was the younger brother. And it was odd, because the younger brother also liked his father and eldest brother. His legs were also limp. At the time, I inadvertently complimented the owner on his good fortune in having 2 sons. But it appeared that the owner was not happy, as he sighed and stated that his family had 3 sons, all of whom were Karma. Faye and I were both very curious at the time, so we looked at each other. When we entered the room, the owner came out and told us to call him if we needed anything. At that point, I began discussing with what the boss had said earlier with Faye. I was in the middle of a conversation when I became extremely hungry because neither Faye nor I had eaten since the afternoon. "Hey, were you hungry? Let's go eat some cup of noodles." The owner was eager to assist us in filling the boiling water and even gave us more sausages. While eating, I inadvertently inquired about his family's story, wondering if it was a hereditary problem with lameness. It was not a disease or a hereditary problem, it was a curse. They seemed to sense something, so he inquired how long their leg's condition had been. According to the owner, his leg was first affected just over 10 years ago, followed by each of his children one by one. At the point, Faye looked around and inquired about the timeline for constructing the hotel. The owner now appeared to have just thought of something. He stated the hotel was built around the same time when he had problems with his legs. Faye began to smile and asked him to get him a compass which would show ghosts. I knew Faye had seen something, so I quickly took out the compass and recircled the house. I asked Faye what he saw, but he just smiled and looked at the compass. We were walking towards the center of the house when the compass needle violently turned. Faye said, "Hey boss, did you have any disagreements with anyone while building the place?" The question surprised the owner as well, because there had been a fight with a person. It was the carpenter who was in charge of the portion of the hotel's construction, who was enraged because everyone was smoking while working. At the time, the owner didn't seem to mind and said it was normal, but he became angrier and raised his voice at his master. The owner stated that he was only a hired worker, so why would he prohibit other people from smoking? The owner was so annoyed that he asked him to leave work early and not have to go back to work. During the time, the owner of the hotel only quarreled with him. According to Faye, the owner had been enchanted for many years, and the spell was still in effect in the house, making his family miserable. Faye said,
Please bring me a hammer or an axe.
When the hotel owner arrived with the tool, Faye handed it to me and told me to smash the floor. I couldn't stand it because I was curious, so I obediently followed it. Because the floor was so hard, it was a little difficult to break right away. It took a long time to break a small hole at the point. Faye stopped me and told us to look at the floor. Something appeared to be visible beneath the floor now, hidden behind the broken bricks. It appeared to have been buried there for a long time. It took a great deal of effort to get it off the ground. It was an old wooden box, but it was still in good condition. I admired Faye because despite being so deep underground, he could see everything. Faye said,
If the interior was made of wood, it must be made by a carpenter. If it was made of clay, it must be made by a builder.
When the box was opened, 4 wooden puppets were inside. The strange thing was all 4 puppets had a broken leg which looked very weird. I picked up the puppets and wondered why they had broken their legs in such a way. Then I abruptly realized that the broken legs matched the boss and his son. The owner was terrified and taken aback because the family's misfortunes were all the result of an argument. The owner begged, "Please help me and my children break the spell." Faye said,
It's a Luban charm, which is well known in the carpentry world. The spell is simple to break, but if you did, the person who casted it would be receiving his own wrath back 100 times.
The owner had a sad expression on his face. He stated that the carpenter died in a car accident a few years ago. After hearing the owner's statement, Faye immediately asked him to bring a mirror. Then he asked me to return the box to its original location, cover it with a mirror, and place 4 coins in each of the 4 corners. According to Faye, their legs would be completely healed in about a year. The owner was very grateful and offered us a free room and asked to pay more for the spell, but Faye refused. I admired Faye once more, and I'd like to ask him to study exorcism. However, Faye stated that his teacher would not accept me. I was curious about the teacher, so I inquired about his name and the location of his cultivation. Faye simply responded that his surname was Zhao and gave a weird smile. Before I went to bed, I tried to persuade Faye to let me join the sect to study. But Faye was still very cold and fell asleep, not paying any attention to my pleadings. I invited Faye to a milk tea shop today with the intention of discussing some issues with him. I took a day off from work, and after we met I talked to him about starting an exorcism business. "I'll find you clients, all you have to do is catch ghosts and we'll make a lot of money." He began to wince, his face becoming irritated because I referred to what he did as business. I realized I had made a mistake, so I apologized to him and asked for his assistance with the case. He didn't respond to me. Instead, he held a cup of milk tea and continuously drank while listening. According to the story, Mr. Wu was an old acquaintance of mine. He had some old rooms for rent, but one of them had recently been haunted. It had been almost a year, and his family was still very happy at the time. He had a son who got married and had a grandson. Everything was fine until his daughter-in-law became involved in an affair. So the two divorced, and the husband, rather than chasing his wife away, took the initiative to bring his son to the city to live together. When Mr. Wu saw his daughter-in-law staying in the room and not coming out in a few days, he decided to enter the room to check out for what happened. Then he discovered something terrible that was still making him suffer until now. The daughter-in-law hanged herself in the room. Her face was pale and her protruding tongue blood red. He rented out that room after his daughter-in-law died, but all of the tenants were so terrified of her ghost that made the surrounding rooms become empty. According to Faye, there was only one possible explanation. 1. Her ghost was trapped, and the other was, she didn't want to leave the place. I believed that he would agree on the case, so I suggested him to come and check out the scene. Faye was still upset, and he asked me if I had already received Mr. Wu's money. I was perplexed and assumed he needed it, so I offered to send it all to him. He refused, telling me to keep them all, and walked away. He seemed angry. He didn't want to wait for me and went straight to the street to catch a cab. So we entered the taxi and started to travel to the location. Following Mr. Wu's instructions, we arrived at his house quickly. He came out from the house to greet us warmly. After that, I introduced him to Faye. He was very down because the rent was a small sum of money that helped him in enjoying his retirement, but no renter anymore, so he begged Faye to help him. Faye was a very quiet person, so he offered to go to the room and take a look, and then return. I could only quietly follow him at this point. The strange thing was that Mr. Wu hadn't said anything yet, but he knew exactly which one to look for among these 4 rooms.
This room has the most yin. The ghost must still be here,
Faye said. I was so scared, so I hid behind Faye when he slowly opened the door. There weren't many things inside, and the room looked almost empty. I expected him to sprinkle some powder, but it didn't seem necessary this time. I felt a little shivery in this murky room. Looking up at the wooden crossbar above, I assumed that was where she committed suicide. Faye abruptly stated that I might need to stay here tonight, which surprised him. Is he going to use me as ghost bait? I thought. Faye required Mr. Wu to allow me to stay one night and he would take care of the situation. Mr. Wu was very welcoming and said he would prepare blankets and pillows for me to stay the night. Then we politely stated to go to prepare some things for the night. On the way, I began to complain about sleeping there, saying that it was too dangerous. But Faye's response left me speechless. You took money for this case, so why don't you take the danger? That night we both met at Mr. Wu's house. As soon as I walked into the room, I felt worried. Faye told me to stay calm because nothing bad would happen. But how could I stay calm?
If that woman doesn't show up tonight, we'll have to stay here for a few more nights,
Faye said. This worried me even more, and when Faye turned away I tried to ask for a self-defense charm from him or something.
You've watched too many movies. There's nothing to be afraid of,
he said with a smile. Faye exited the room and shut the door, leaving me alone in the room. I regretted taking this case. I could only grit my teeth and lie down on the bed at this point. I could imagine where the woman hanged herself and how unsightly she looked when she died. The more I looked up there, the more spine-chilling effect I felt. Then I lied down and stared at the crossbar until I fell asleep. I heard a strange sound, followed by the sound of running water, which became clearer and clearer. It gave me a headache, woke me up. I attempted to open my eyes but couldn't. The scene that followed, however, jolted me awake with a pair of feet floating in front of me. The woman hanging on the gallows was staring at me with frightening bloodshot eyes. All I could do now was back up and scream in terror. She drew closer to me, her neck still clinging to the rope. Her pale face and long tongue was staring at me. Faye threw open the door just when I thought I was going to die. His hand was doing something strange. Later on I discovered that it was the symbol of the magic he used. He gently waved his hand, and I thought he was very cool right now. The woman's ghost was hurled away by an unknown force.
Why don't you just leave, Ghost? Why do you stay in this disturbance? Faye said heavily.
The ghost was now terrified in front of Faye. She declared that she wouldn't leave her house and didn't want anyone to stay around. Faye said,
You are no longer in this world. I will take strong action if you don't leave.
The woman began to cry and begged Faye. She wanted to wait for her husband and his son. Faye considered that she shouldn't have an affair if she'd loved her family that much. She began crying even harder, and then told Faye that she was the victim. She was a company secretary. That day when she was going out for dinner with everybody, her boss forced her to do something. He forced her to drink alcohol so much that she would lose consciousness. Later he brought her to his home. Then he depraved her and didn't admit what he did. Faye believed that she wouldn't remember anything after reincarnation, so why not let go? She didn't resent the boss. She just wanted to see her husband and son one more time. I was moved by the story and wanted Faye to help her. Faye then instructed me to go find a black umbrella. I was overjoyed and went straight to Mr. Wu to borrow an umbrella. Faye turned to face the girl, holding the umbrella, and told her to come inside. She immediately transformed into smoke and climbed into the umbrella. Faye took a red string from his bag and tied it to the umbrella. Then we took the umbrella and went to a city elementary school. It was right after school, so it was extremely crowded. After some time, Faye opened the umbrella. She was standing under the umbrella, according to Faye. A boy and a man appeared at the gate after a few minutes. Suddenly, a cloud of black smoke billowed from the umbrella. She had seen her son and was about to step out of the umbrella when the sun burned her, so Faye told her not to go out. We followed the father and son down the road. The boy was walking when he turned his head to look at us. He told his father that he heard his mother calling him. The husband turned to look but saw nothing. I guess the woman called her son. We followed them for a long time before coming to a halt at a bend. Faye folded the umbrella and declared, "Enough here." Then Faye went under a bridge. He placed the umbrella and took me away. I was not sure why we left her there. However, Faye stated that there was a transit station and that someone would come and take her away. We walked together for a while before parting. I had a plan as soon as I turned away. I went to the company where the woman worked before and waited for the boss to leave. I approached him with a brick in my hand. As soon as I raised the brick, Faye grabbed one as well and dashed forwards. Both were taken aback by the other's appearance. There was a noise followed by a cry for help. The cops on patrol began to pursue us. When I asked Faye why he did this, he explained that he wanted to avenge for the son's sake. As for me, I wanted to avenge the woman. So because of this, Faye and I had to stay at home for several days in a row and couldn't go out. After the previous cases, I felt closer to Faye, so I invited him to go out for milk tea in free time. I also really wanted to learn about his ability to capture demons, but he just smiled and he didn't answer my questions. He just said I was like a curious child, and he was right. While we were talking, Faye's phone rang loudly. I could just hear someone was begging him to do something. After hanging up the phone, Faye stood up and said goodbye to me. "I have urgent business to attend to." Because I had some spare time, I followed him. He didn't say anything as I got into the taxi with him. I was interested to know where he was going. According to Faye, we would go to a funeral goods store. The store was located on a funeral street and the store was next to the hospital. Next, we started to enter one of the many stores on the street. As soon as we walked in, the owner welcomed us warmly, as if the owner and Faye already knew one another.
Faye, you must help me, otherwise I will have to close my store and relocate somewhere else.
Faye reassured him and asked him to clarify the details. We sat down and the owner started talking about the terrifying events of the previous night. When the owner was about to close the shop, a customer walked in. The customer was an old man. He appeared to be over 70 years old. The man had a weak figure. The owner still very enthusiastically welcomed the old man and asked what the old man needed. The old man said he needed to buy a pair of shoes. The owner asked the old man for the size and if the old man wanted to buy it for men or women. However, the old man stated that he wanted to buy the shoes for himself. The owner was a bit surprised, but the owner assumed it was normal for the old man to purchase a gift for himself. So the owner looked down to see the size of the old man's feet. But as soon as he looked down, he panicked. The old man walked barefoot. His pants and feet were covered with blood. When the owner turned around, he saw bloodstains all over the floor. When the owner examined the elderly man's face attentively, he saw that the old man did not appear to be a lively person since his face was grey and gloomy. The owner had been doing the job for decades, so he also realized that something was wrong. Then the owner used an excuse to get some goods and he quickly moved into the warehouse. When the owner arrived at the warehouse, the owner locked the door behind him. He feared that the old man would follow him. Therefore he stood in the warehouse and he didn't dare to go out at all. About an hour later, the owner heard a knock on the door and a call from his wife. He had just stepped outside at that point and his wife was surprised to see him with such an expression. Outside, the old man had disappeared. There were only shoes scattered on the floor, and even his wife thought that the thief had broken in. Then the owner panicked and told his wife about the old man.
It's terrible, darling. I just met a ghost. He came here to buy shoes for himself.
The owner wanted to prove his words. He hurried to get to the computer to turn on the camera. But when he checked the camera, he panicked even more. The wife was very confused because there was no old man on the camera. On the camera, she just looked at the owner who was talking to himself. After hearing the owner's story, the wife also started to feel scared. The owner was afraid that the old man would come back again tonight, so he called Faye. Faye had a smile on his face and told the owner to leave early tonight and we would stay at the shop. The owner was very happy to see us off and we promised to meet at the shop later that night. I was wondering. I couldn't help him. However, Faye wanted me to stay.
Tonight I need you to disguise yourself as the owner of the shop.
After hearing that, I expected an extremely dangerous and thrilling experience for me. After that, Faye stated that he needed to find something, so I just followed him. I followed him to a votive store. The store was full of paper people, paper horses, handmade paper furniture. They were not printed items like other places. The owner seemed to be too familiar with Faye and he directly asked Faye what to look for this time. Faye:
I need a pair of paper shoes for a special guest.
The shopkeeper immediately understood Faye's words, and because he had skill and skillful hands, the keeper made a pair of shoes very quickly. A pair of beautifully textured gold shoes were quickly completed, and of course, the shoes were made with a special charm that only Faye and the shop owner could understand. Then we went back to the funeral store in the evening. I sat in the store and I pretended to be a salesman, and I anxiously waited. I stared at the door and couldn't take my eyes off it for a second. I was so nervous because I was about to be face to face with a ghost. Behind the door, the feeling of anticipation made me feel weak. The old man could arrive at any time. About 10 o'clock that night, the door suddenly opened as an old man entered. Like the owner described, the old man had a grave face and looked very scary. The most terrifying thing was that he was barefoot and that blood was trailing in his wake. I mustered up my courage, picked up the paper shoes and went out to greet him. Then he tried the shoes on and the shoes looked really good actually. He was pleased and gave me a bill. I trembled when I realized it was the money of the underworld. Then he immediately left. I breathed a sigh of relief. As soon as he left, I rushed to follow him and saw Faye. He was standing outside. With the speed of old people, of course, the old man couldn't go very fast. Faye then took out a red bandage from his pocket and he asked me to put it on. I was curious to know why, but Faye just kept silent. I also obediently followed, of course. I thought that if I put it on, I would maybe not see anything. But the bandage was very thin, so I could still see in front of me a bit. I saw something strange. There was a long line of footprints on the ground. Faye said the footprints were that of the old man, as we followed him to know where he was going. After that, we were so focused on following the footsteps that we walked longer than 15 minutes. Finally, we reached the destination, which was a nearby hospital. We continued to follow the footsteps. We passed a bend and a corridor, and we came to a small room behind the hospital. Faye looked like he knew he would enter this room, so he wasn't surprised to see the man. Then Faye took out his phone, and from the sound of it, I guess he was calling the manager of the hospital. I was more and more amazed with his wide connections. More than 10 minutes later, the manager rushed over. He seemed to have known Faye for a long time and he was pleased that Faye had a job for him. After Faye's offer, he led us into a room which was a morgue. And according to Faye's description of the old man, the manager recognized the old man. He had been dead here for many days, but his relatives didn't come to pick him up. As soon as the manager opened the white cloth, even though I was mentally prepared, I still felt chills. And the old man's body was indeed wearing a pair of paper shoes that I gave him earlier. The old man's legs and pants were covered in dried blood, just like when I sold him the shoes. The manager was surprised because he remembered that the old man wasn't wearing any paper shoes before. Faye, do you know why the old man died? The manager said that he was sent from the construction site because of a working accident. Faye asked the manager to check the old man's information on their system. Faye wanted to know his name and date of birth. Then we said our goodbyes. The manager seemed to really respect Faye. When we arrived back at the funeral store, Faye selected a new suit and shoes for the old man, and Faye wrote his name and date of birth on them. I didn't understand what Faye was doing, so I asked him. Faye said that when people die and their relatives don't come to retrieve them, their spirits become very lonely and ashamed of their state, so we shouldn't let any of them go without nice burial clothes. Faye said we needed to take it to the nearest intersection to burn it. At that time I thought, was the old man really going to receive these items? Everything burned really quickly and it was already past midnight. Because I was so tired, I planned to go home and sleep right away, but Faye made me clean up the ashes of the paper clothes before I could go home. As for the funeral shop, Faye said that the owner needed to light firecrackers and incense in front of the door. The business would then return to normal. Indeed, after the story I experienced another rather interesting incident with ghosts. And so I was learning more and more about Faye's talents and skills. My friend had a colleague. Her name was Umi. Umi's house was having some problems, so she needed our help. My friend gave us Umi's address. We took a taxi to her house. Faye wondered why so many people knew about us. He didn't know that I almost opened a service for our job. Many people knew us because of my extensive connections. Faye said that I seemed like a good fit for the job. The first time he complimented me. But according to Faye, because his fate had decided, he will also face many dangerous things, so I should protect myself too. When we arrived to the right address, I rang the bell to call the owner. I took the initiative to make an appointment with her first. The door then slowly opened. All of a sudden, a cat rushed out from the house. The cat ran at a very fast speed. Because I didn't know that Umi's house had cats, both Faye and I were startled. The cat just jumped out and ran away very quickly. At the same time, a woman chased after the cat. I guessed she was probably Umi. After she saw us, she stopped chasing the cat and she invited us into the house. When I turned, I saw Faye standing still and looking after the cat. He had to wait for me to call him. He came back to his senses. After we went inside, Umi invited us to have a drink and introduced herself. Faye and I solved many cases together, so I knew his frankness. I immediately went to the main point and asked Umi what happened. According to Umi, inside her house there had lately been happening a lot of strange things. Faye asked her to tell all the details so that he could make good solutions. So Umi claimed that her house was haunted. I wondered why she was so sure. Her house must have had some strange phenomena. Umi started telling us. Her neighbor's baby went missing a few days ago. One day when the children gathered together to play hide and seek, her neighbor's boy disappeared. The boy's family was very worried. All children playing with him didn't know where the boy was. The family asked the local police to help them and everyone searched for him all night together. They scoured and searched all over the neighborhood, all over the street, but they couldn't find the boy. And several days later something strange happened. Therefore, Umi thought the boy had appeared in her house, because when he was alive he used to come and play with her cat. Since the boy went missing and he was rumored to be dead by the local police, there were strange things that began to happen in her house. In the middle of the night, Umi was sleeping. All of a sudden, she was woken up by a strange noise. The noise was coming from the living room. Umi tried to listen better. At first, she thought the noise was the cat and dog, but when she listened more closely, the noise was the sound of a child. The child was crying. Even though she was a little scared, despite of her curiosity, Umi also went to the living room to see what was wrong. And maybe Umi guessed right. The noise came from the living room. When she stepped out to the living room, the crying was clearer and louder. Despite being scared, Umi still tried to raise her voice to ask who was crying in her living room. In the living room, she heard the chair was emitting a cry. She slowly approached the chair, and as she walked, she asked if the noise was the boy or not. But when she was approaching, all of a sudden, from behind the chair, her cat ran out. At the same time, Umi only noticed her cat, and she held at the cat because the cat startled her. The following day, when Umi woke up to go to the toilet at night, she just came out of her bedroom. Umi was terrified by something on the ground. On the ground, there were countless wet footprints. The footprints clearly imprinted on the floor, and the footprints a child's footprint because the footprints were very small. Umi followed the footsteps as she went right to the kitchen. She saw that the refrigerator was opened. The food inside the refrigerator was ransacked as if someone had searched for food. Umi looked sad because she didn't know why the boy didn't come to his home, but instead haunted her house. The strange thing was Faye didn't ask about the missing boy. Faye just wanted to ask about Umi's cat. Faye wanted to know if the cat often ran out of the house or not. Umi said that since the boy went missing, about 2 days later the cat started going out and hiding more often. Faye stood up and asked Umi if he could go around the house to take a look. I also went behind Faye. We moved from Umi's bedroom. Then we continued to check the living room and the kitchen. Faye remained silent and didn't say anything. I asked Faye if he saw a ghost of the missing boy. Faye said that there was nothing unusual in the house. I was greatly surprised. Faye went to open the window to observe. He looked outside. No one could enter through the window. I also didn't understand what Faye was speculating in his head. All of a sudden, Faye turned to Umi and asked if the cat often climbed out of the window. Umi was also surprised by Faye's question. She clearly knew that the cat often went into hiding at this window. After Faye heard Umi's answer, Faye just smiled and said that we will find the answer tonight. Then Faye took out a small camera. Faye still refused to tell me his intentions. He just sat down to test the camera. His camera could connect to his phone. After we made arrangements, we said goodbye to Umi and said we would be back tonight. After we left Umi's house, Faye also said that he had his own business to deal with at the same time, so he told me to go home first. In the night, because I was so impatient, I arrived earlier than the scheduled time and I stood in front of Umi's house to wait for Faye. He was also late, so I waited for a long time. I was bitten by mosquitoes. When Faye came, Faye still didn't ask or cared about me, but he just stared at the phone. I was curious to see what he was looking at on his phone, but as soon as I looked at it, I saw in his phone was a picture of the inside of Umi's house. The scene was captured by Faye's camera. The direction of Faye's camera was the refrigerator in the kitchen. Just a moment later, Umi's cat suddenly appeared and went to the refrigerator. The cat stood up on his hind legs. The cat masterfully opened the refrigerator door with his front paw. After rummaging through the refrigerator for a long time, the cat found a bag of cookies and put the bag in his mouth, and then he left. Faye was tracking it for a while. The cat completely left the camera's view. Faye told me to look up and see a surprising thing, and Faye was right. The cat was climbing out of the window. The cat opened the window masterfully. Then the cat jumped down to the air conditioning fan below him. Then from the air conditioner, the cat jumped straight to the ground. While holding the bag of cookies, the cat ran past us. Immediately, Faye yelled for me to chase the cat. The cat ran very fast, jumping up to a tree. And then, the cat simply jumped over a high fence. Amazingly, Faye also ran and he moved quickly. Like the cat, he also jumped on the tree to gain momentum. Then Faye jumped over the fence and he disappeared.
Hey.
So I thought I would climb the electric pole and try to climb over the fence, but I just climbed a little bit, as I was discovered by the security guard, who was patrolling around. They thought I was a thief, so they arrested me, even though I explained that I was hunting ghosts. The more I talked, the more they didn't believe me. So they tied me up and took me to the police station. After that, I couldn't witness it with my own eyes, so I heard the story from Faye. He climbed over the fence and caught up with the cat. The cat ran very fast and started to enter the dilapidated construction site. Faye saw a hole underneath the rubble. The hole looked like a well. Faye understood the problem and he immediately called the police to come and inspect the well. The police quickly arrived and Faye started explaining the whole thing to the police officers. Finally, they and Faye carried the broken concrete and bricks. They saw underneath the rubble was a deep well, and more amazingly, they saw the boy and Umi's cat underneath the well. The boy had been missing for a week. The boy seemed to be still alive. The boy was surrounded by crumbs and food, and the food was all brought by the cat. The boy was rescued and taken to the hospital immediately. We also told the story to Umi. She was very happy to have such a good cat. After we finished all, we also left. Although everything was clear, I still had many questions. I asked him, "How did you know that everything was done by the cat?" Faye said that when he observed the refrigerator door and the whole window, he saw traces of the cat's claws. I kept wondering, even so, why Umi saw the crying and the footprints in her house. Faye said that the crying may be the cat imitating the boy's voice, and the footprints were in Umi's house because there were water in the well. The cat's paws got wet and entered the house. In the light of the evening, perhaps Umi was too frightened to see the footprints of a cat. Faye said that cats were the most instinctive species, so shamans could rely on cats to connect with the living dead. After Umi's case, I had a new perspective on Faye. He was also very practical and scientific in some situations, so I admired Faye even more, and I continued to follow him. I would ask him to show me some ghost subjugation techniques, but he still rejected me. Maybe I didn't have qualities like Faye. If so, I will follow him for the rest of my life. We were walking to a busy intersection when it happened. I continued to pursue Faye in order to persuade him to allow me to join the sect, but he always declined. He said that his master admitted the disciples very harshly and strictly, and I did not meet the criteria. I'm still not satisfied and kept asking about the criteria, whether they were wealthy, talented, or something else. Faye maintained his strange smile and walked away, paying no attention to me, but perhaps I was too annoying, so he responded, "The most important criterion one's handsomeness." I thought to myself and touched my face. I thought I was handsome as well. I told Faye that if I was very handsome, I would probably be accepted. Faye appeared to have no opinion on me. So in the end, what was the most important criterion? Faye just said that the beauty was my value. It didn't matter whether I was handsome or not. During his conversation, he abruptly turned his head to look behind him as if he was following someone. I was also perplexed, so I inquired as to what had occurred, and I turned to look in the direction reflexively. It was a beautiful girl. Was it possible that Faye had a preference for beautiful girls? However, according to Faye, she was being followed by a ghost. According to Faye's description, the ghost was black and stuck to the girl's back. It didn't have a definite shape, it simply appeared to be black smoke. With these words, Faye immediately followed the girl to see how things were going. So we began following her, walking like stalkers. I told Faye following along her in the manner was not a good idea. According to Faye, it appeared that something strange was about to happen, but they didn't know when, so they had to follow along to observe. According to Faye, the strange thing might endanger the girl's life, but we couldn't intervene for the time being. All of a sudden, the girl rushed into the street as if she had been shoved. A truck was approaching from below, and the situation was extremely dangerous. Faye immediately rushed towards the girl, and fortunately he was able to cling to her shirt, so it allowed him to hold her, avoiding a terrible accident. The car was moving so fast that it didn't have time to brake or turn around, but it kept going. Perhaps the driver was afraid of getting into trouble. Faye inquired about the girl's situation. She appeared very panicked at the time. Her face was pale and she could not be calmed down. After a few moments of calm, the girl was able to tell Faye that she was fine. Faye immediately went right to the point, asking her how many times it had happened. The girl was taken aback because Faye seemed to know everything. She began to be wary of us, owing to the fact that we were strangers anyway. It was when I demonstrated my eloquence by briefly introducing Faye and stating that he saw an evil spirit following her. She reflexively turned back to look, but obviously she couldn't see anything. I started persuading her to tell us everything she was going through. After that, I went to a tea shop so she could calm down and we would try to help her. She began to recount after taking a few sips of water and gradually calming herself down. According to the girl, it was the third time in the week when she had unexpectedly fallen down the stairs, sometimes with a flower pot on top of her falling too. Fortunately, she was able to escape each time. Did you have a quarrel with anyone, or did anything strange happen during the time? Faye seriously asked the girl. She became quiet for a while, looking sad and thoughtful. She finally said that her boyfriend had recently died in a traffic accident while on his way to meet her. Faye continued to ask her if she felt like someone was following her, because it was possible that her boyfriend was following her. After hearing the questions, the girl agreed to respond right away because she felt that everything she had recently met agreed with what Faye said. Recently, whenever she went out at night, she had the sensation that someone was walking right behind her, but when she turned around, she saw no one. It was the same thing when she went to bed at night. She could clearly feel someone lying next to her and everything felt so real, but when she looked back, she didn't see anyone. Faye continued to ask, did the other people around her have anything strange? The girl seemed thoughtful and then replied that her boyfriend's mother came to visit her last week. I felt it was not unusual and it didn't match Faye's question, so I told her to tell us more about the story. She showed a sad face, slowly picked up a glass of water to drink, and stated that her boyfriend's mother hated her and believed she murdered her child. I began to be unexpected by the incident. The girl went on to say that while leaving work, her boyfriend was on his way to meet her, but didn't come home first, and he was then hit by a car. As a result, his mother began to place all of the blame on the girl. What was stranger, his mother called her, cursing and terrorizing her for a while after her son's death, but not long ago she unexpectedly came to visit her. In the day, she arrived with a cheerful expression on her face without cursing or showing any disgrace. The girl was taken aback and asked what was wrong, but she simply told her to pay her a visit and see if there were any of her son's belongings left over and she would bring them back. But instead of sitting in the living room, she went straight to the girl's bedroom and abruptly said the blankets and pillows were messy, so she wanted to help her arrange them neatly. Just as the girl was about to stop her, she diverted her attention by asking the girl to get her a glass of water. Strangely, when she went to get water and returned to give it to her, she said that she was busy and quickly left. When she left, her expression changed. She was no longer as happy as she had been, and her mouth was still muttering something strange. After hearing the story, I also knew that his mother did something in her room without explanation from Faye. Faye asked the girl to take us to her room so that Faye could take a closer look and help her. I was not sure if it was due to psychological effects, but when I entered the room it felt a little cold and gloomy. Then I didn't know what to do next, so I waited for Faye to finish observing and tell me. After looking around the room for a while, he stared at the mattress and asked me to raise it. Of course I would do the heavy lifting, I was always the one to do it. When I lifted the mattress, he began to bend down to look beneath it, and obviously there was something strange. Underneath the mattress, there was a black paper puppet. Faye removed the puppet from the mattress and claimed that it was the source of the recent strange occurrences. Faye looked at the puppet and explained to us.
This type of puppet would have many different colors and different ways of doing damage. The black figure was the most ferocious and evil. It would follow and harm the affected person until they died in the most painful way possible, at which point it would stop.
After finishing saying this, Faye clamped the puppet between two fingers, then flipped it over and over again while reciting incantations with his mouth, and the puppet caught fire without any intervention. When the puppet caught fire, the girl let out a loud scream and hugged her hand. I also heard panic and asked the girl what was going on. She said it felt like burning and it was very hot on her back. Faye reassured the girl, saying that everything had been resolved and she would no longer be in danger. After that, we said goodbye to the girl and left. I also planned to charge the girl a fee but was stopped by Faye. I still wondered why Faye refused to let me charge the girl. Faye simply smiled and said helping her was a charm. Couldn't be charged. There was a deceased member of her family who did many good deeds while alive, so the person helped her avoid all these disasters as well as let her meet Faye. Faye went straight out to catch a taxi. Just a moment ago, he asked the girl for the address of his boyfriend's house. I was not sure what he was planning to do. I kept following and he said he would come take a look. But whoever the bad guy was, they should be punished a little. According to the address, we also reached the house of her deceased boyfriend. Walking along the road to find the address of the house, all of a sudden we saw a sight which made us change our mind. On the chair in front of her boyfriend's house, there was an elderly woman sitting. Her hair messy and her face was lifeless. She appeared to be the mother of the deceased boyfriend, and now she was no longer awake, as Faye had also turned away. I was curious as to why Faye didn't approach her and try to talk to her, but Faye believed she was receiving the retribution she deserved for her actions. I didn't think we should just leave her alone. She should have received more appropriate punishment for nearly killing the innocent girl. Faye simply laughed and stated that in the world, the cause and effects were infinite. I couldn't fully understand this. It was not always when people attempted to punish each other, which it was referred to as retribution. That day, I had an important appointment with Faye. Therefore, in the early morning, I rushed to the meeting place. I tried to convince Faye to follow me to a relative's house to solve some problems. Faye hastily refused my offer. He used the excuse that he had an important appointment with a client today and couldn't come with me. Seeing Faye about to leave, I rushed to the front of him, urgently pleading. I told Faye that if things were delayed, murder would happen. After listening, even though Faye felt a little uncomfortable in his heart, he reluctantly agreed to follow me. As soon as I saw Faye nod, I quickly took out 2 bus tickets that I had prepared in advance. After that, I took Faye to the parking lot, preparing to hit the road on the first bus of the day. While preparing to board the bus, I saw Faye busy handling the rest of his work. He talked to the customers to delay important appointments and reschedule the store's work. Finally, the 2 of us got on the bus and departed for my aunt's house. Along the way, I felt guilty about Faye having to cancel important appointments just to help me, but Faye said he could arrange it and I needn't to worry. Seeing Faye's kindness, I promised to treat him to a worthy meal as a thank you. Faye laughed and took a sip of water and asked me the whole story. The story began with my relationship with this relative. Actually, we were not close, but because of my blood, I couldn't ignore it. Faye continued to ask and I went straight to the topic my aunt was having. I told Faye that my aunt was suffering from a strange disease. Her neck suddenly became crooked after a night. Faye propped his chin, looked out the window and asked if I took my aunt to the hospital for a checkup. So I told Faye that the family took her to be checked everywhere but couldn't find the disease. Faye didn't say anything after listening to me, just told me to wake him up when we got there. After that, both Faye and I took a long nap on the bus. After a few hours on the bus, Faye and I finally arrived. We got out of the bus and walked down the road leading to our aunt's house.
Hey!
In the distance, I caught sight of a familiar man running over to greet the 2 of us. I introduced Faye to my cousin, the aunt's son. After that, the 3 of us started greeting and getting to know each other and went home. My aunt's small house was located at the end of the road, leading into a dense forest. I took Faye inside and asked him if he felt anything unusual around. Faye just shook his head. At this point I was surprised because my aunt said that her disease was caused by her father's spirit. I led Faye into the room to meet my aunt. Since being sick, she didn't seem to go out. In the middle of the room, my aunt said hello with her neck tilted to the side. Due to the disease that directly affected the spine, now my aunt couldn't sit up straight like a normal person. Faye listened to my aunt talking about her condition and then asked my aunt about her father's spirit. She said that she kept dreaming about her late father for a week, and since then, her neck had become like this. My uncle sat next to me, just as surprised as we were. My aunt took this opportunity to recount the words that her father said in the dream. When my uncle heard it, he was even more surprised. Uncle said right at her father's grave, how could there be a big tree branch that would press on her father's grave like that? Faye felt that the story seemed serious, so he told my uncle to take him and me to her father's grave to check. My uncle also tried to join us outside the grave buried in the backyard of the house. This garden was the burial place of deceased relatives in the family. Faye and I stood in front of her father's grave, bowing politely. After that, Faye and I took a walk around the grounds to check. Faye's face was also very pensive at that time. Faye remained silent, his eyes revealing the familiar seriousness. He looked around in every nook and cranny. After a moment of tension, Faye turned to me and said, "Could you lend me your shoulder?" I was surprised and confused after hearing that, but before I could say anything, Faye jumped on my shoulder and stood on top of it. He glanced in the direction of the grave and gave a meaningful smile. After knowing the exact problem to be solved, Faye hurriedly jumped down. I brushed the dust off my shoulders and asked Faye in the end, "What's up with this?" I looked at Faye's serious face and heard every word he said with certainty. He confirmed the fact that there was a tree on her father's grave. I already knew Faye's ability, but because I was curious, I wanted Faye to prove to me that what he said was true. Faye struggled for a while and then took out a handful of coins from his pocket. After that, Faye went to the aunt's father's grave and plucked small branches around it. In the end, Faye put the coins on these branches and told me to wait and see the results. I watched nervously for a while. Then, a strange phenomenon happened at the aunt's father's grave. My uncle and I were also amazed at this mysterious spiritual phenomenon. In front of the grave, the coins suddenly moved, floating in the air. Not only that, they flew higher and higher as proof that her father was still here. My uncle woke up to Faye and asked Faye what was up with this. Faye immediately recounted what he had felt. Most likely a large tree branch accidentally fell on the aunt's father's grave, penetrated the soil and pressed on the lid of the coffin. When my uncle heard it, he worriedly asked Faye,
"Oh no, oh my god, so what should I do now?"
Faye reassured my uncle and told him not to worry. They just needed to dig up the top layer of soil and remove the broken branch. My uncle then also asked Faye when the right time to dig a grave was. I said it was the best to do it today with my aunt's health situation like this. After listening to me and getting Faye's confirmation, my uncle immediately called a few young men to help dig the grave. My uncle and some young people in the village were on the land and started digging up the grave in only the afternoon. After 1 hour, the top layer of soil was plowed out, revealing the wooden coffin lying inside. We stood around the grave, gazing at the coffin. Everyone was surprised to see a large wooden branch lying on top of the coffin. Based on the size of the branch, anyone could get that this was a perennial tree branch and accidentally fell right at her father's neck. My uncle then took out a wooden branch, intending to bring it home to make firewood in the house, but Faye quickly stopped it. Faye came in front of my uncle. His eyes were cold. Faye told my uncle not to damage his branch of the tree and also not to leave it in the house because it had yin kui. My aunt and uncle should take this branch to an empty lot and burn it. They shouldn't use it as firewood and remember to burn it on the night of the full moon. In order to make the bus home in time, we didn't stay but said goodbye to our aunt's family to leave. Once we were on the bus, my aunt called me and told me the good news that she was cured. She thanked Faye and me. Faye was still very cold. He leaned back in his chair calmly, even though I was chirpingly recounting my phone conversation with my aunt. Faye sat with his eyes closed, repeating my pledge to the sumptuous meal that I promised to treat him as thanks. I laughed loudly, confidently announcing that I would treat him to a hearty meal. Then I invited him to visit my aunt in my hometown in his free time to enjoy the food my aunt cooked. While happily chatting, the driver sitting above turned down and held at me. He asked me to keep order and not to make noise to disturb others. His attitude drove me crazy. I strained my neck to argue with him. It wasn't until he said he would leave me on the road that I would shut up. That day, I texted Faye again, asking him to assist me in resolving some strange events that happened in my family. I quickly informed Faye that this was an emergency, but strangely, Faye didn't say much this time. On the contrary, he even invited me to his home to make it easier for us to talk. I dashed out onto the main street and took a taxi to Faye's house. The taxi pulled over to an empty and quiet residential area that appeared to be a resort. I followed Faye's direction message to an opulent mansion. I was so taken aback by what I saw, I even felt dizzy. Faye's house was an unexpectedly large and magnificent mansion. To enter, I showed the security guard Faye's picture and informed him that I was his friend. After hearing the guard's instruction to find Faye's room, I came to a room and began knocking. Faye weakly came out from the room with a haggard look on his face. Faye sat in the chair looking exhausted, and I was so concerned, I inquired about Faye's health. He coughed and said he had a common cold, then asked me in a weak voice about my business. I approached Faye and I told him that I had just received a call from a relative on my paternal side who informed me that the deceased great-grandfather in the family had miraculously resurrected. Faye sighed and looked at me with a twinkle in his eyes, saying he couldn't accompany me this time. I considered Faye's health and could understand the inconvenience. However, only Faye could help me with this case. Faye, seeing this, reassured me and struggled to find something. Then Faye gave me a business card, instructed me to go see this person. This young man's name was Alpha, and he was the owner of a small funeral goods store down the street, according to his business card. Faye also informed me that Alpha, who was quite close to him, was a talented shaman. Following that, Faye instructed me to rush to his address, find Alpha, and explain that Faye had introduced me to him. Then he would agree to help. I quickly stood up and prepared to leave when Faye reached into his pocket and handed me a coin. I picked up the change and looked at it, perplexed, but then realized it had to be because Faye wanted me to wear it as an amulet. Then I went outside, grabbed a taxi, and hit the road. I sat in the car, told the driver the address, and kept my gaze fixed on the business card in my hand. The car raced to a small town in the center of the city, surrounded by rows of busy stores. I followed the address until I came to a small funeral store at the end of the street. I walked over, gently opened the door, and called out loudly for someone, but no one answered. I went inside and was captivated by the colorful paper dolls in this place. I couldn't take my gaze away from the oddly shaped paper dolls until someone came from inside and stood in front of me. When I looked up, I noticed a man with long, flowing hair, similar to that of a woman. I introduced myself that I was Faye's friend, and I needed to meet the owner of the shop, Alpha. The young man in front of me introduced himself as Alpha and invited me into the store to talk. When I looked at him, I noticed that his personality was similar and cold to Faye's. He sat on the ground, expertly crafted a doll, and asked if I had come to find him. I also sat down next to Alpha and told him about my family's situation. My great-grandfather died a few days ago in my hometown. There was a young niece in the family at the time who organized his funeral. Funerals were also held in a straightforward manner. The coffin lid was not in a hurry to close because relatives from far away were expected to attend. His eldest son, who was also my second grandfather, consoled and assisted this niece at the funeral. Every night after the funeral, something strange happened in the niece's house. She was awakened every time the clock struck 12 o'clock that night by someone calling from outside the room. She unintentionally looked at the window and noticed a dark shadow moving across the curtain. She couldn't tell who was outside in the darkness, but she knew it was a man. She dashed over, gently lifting the curtain with her hand. Her eyes quickly focused on the body of her great-grandfather, who had just died in the house, which she had not expected. His body looked so frightening, resembling a zombie, and he even jumped around the house like a zombie as well. She was so terrified that she dashed to the door to double-check if what she saw was true. She shivered, hid behind a wall, and opened the door slightly to look outside. Outside, the horror and gloom scene made her exclaim in shock, standing motionlessly as if she couldn't hold on. The great-grandfather's body approached her, revealing his face and figure with red spots on his body. She was so terrified by what she saw that she covered her mouth with her hand and took a trembling step back. She sat against the wall, cried, and promptly fell asleep. When she awoke, everything was back to normal, and the body of her great-grandfather was no longer in the house. She went into her room to check, but nothing had changed inside. She couldn't forget what she saw, so she went to the location where the old man's body was placed to examine. She took her time walking towards the altar room, took a deep breath, and then opened the door to the room. She took a chance and went to the old man's coffin to look inside. She peered inside the coffin and saw his body, which still looked ruddy and lying still in the coffin as if nothing had happened. She exhaled a sigh of relief, believing that everything was still normal and that it was most likely due to a dream she had the night before, so it was all an hallucination. Something suddenly drew her attention. When she looked down at the souls of her great-grandfather, she noticed that the top was dusty, just like the front porch of her room. She began to panic and tremble as she realized what had occurred was completely real. She took a step back, unsure how to deal with it, when a gentle hand on her shoulder made her jump. When she turned around, there stood my second grandfather. It turned out that he also stated that not only she, but he as well had the same problem. Since the great-grandfather's death, his spirit had appeared every night. He was jumping back and forth in front of the room, making the niece very scared. She guessed there was something he couldn't get rid of, so his spirit kept coming here, which made her very sad. So she called and asked for my assistance. I told Alpha that because Faye's health was deteriorating, I needed his help. Alpha finished the bamboo frame for the doll and stood up as soon as I finished my story. He went inside to gather his belongings and told me to follow him out of the car so we could go to my great-grandfather's house. He led me out of the store and told me that because of the emergency, he would drive himself and that I just needed to tell him the location. At first, I noticed Alpha approaching an old and battered family car parked in front of his shop. I thought he was about to get into the car, but then he used the remote to unlock a luxury car that was hidden next to it. Alpha accelerated that supercar down the highway. There was no doubt in my mind when he told me to let him drive so it could be faster. Sitting in the car, I nervously discussed my great-grandfather's issue with him. I had the impression that he was very cold, as much as Faye. It seemed that all Shaman had this thing in common. I sat in the car nervously asking Alpha about my great-grandfather. He sighed and said coldly,
"Surely the great-grandfather was controlled by someone else, but he couldn't have come back to life and just become a demon."
After the answer, Alpha went silent again and drove. Alpha drove the luxury car into the village. My whole village stirred and talked about his wealth. I led Alpha into the courtyard. My great-grandfather's young niece came out and greeted us. After a few conversations, Alpha got to work. We went to the shrine room, where the great-grandfather's body was kept with a very calm face. I slowly walked forward, looking at my great-grandfather's body lying in the coffin with mournful eyes. But when I looked closely, my great-grandfather's body still surprised me a bit. My great-grandfather's skin was pale as if he had lost blood, and his face was also full of small puncture holes. I glanced slightly at Alpha. When I saw the smile on his face, I knew he understood where the problem was. When we were out, Alpha asked my great-grandfather's niece to take him to see the elderly man's memento. The girl was also a bit confused at first, but then did as Alpha said. She unlocked and gently opened the wooden door, inviting us inside. The whole room exuded solitude, quiet and old. There was not much furniture inside, mainly the antiques of the great-grandfather. Alpha calmly went to look at each item carefully. His eyes were also a little interested. I stood behind Alpha with the granddaughter, asking him how to solve my great-grandfather's problem, but he was not in a hurry to answer and suggested that he and I should rest, eat and wait until evening to act. The granddaughter prepared Alpha and me a cozy meal with my favorites. After eating and drinking, Alpha suddenly called me to follow him to the shrine room to start acting. I looked at Alpha in bewilderment, but before I could ask any more questions, I saw him come out. I hurriedly chased after Alpha into my great-grandfather's shrine room. Probably because it was night, I found the room cold and gloomy. I stood in the distance, watching Alpha pull out a large doll from the wooden chest he was carrying. Inside the wooden chest there were many papers, pens and ink of all kinds. He was painting something I didn't know while asking me to tear off the pieces of paper surrounding the doll. After listening, I went over to help him tear the paper outside the doll. At the same time, Alpha started mixing glue, putting it in a small bowl, looking very attentive. He took out a large brush and used it to apply glue to each thin bamboo stick to form the doll's frame. Next, Alpha skillfully took each piece of paper that he had painted earlier and applied it to the frame. Alpha looked over at me and said he was using the perpetrator's own method to get the perpetrator. After a while, Alpha created a doll with the exact same color and shape as a real person. Finally, Alpha told me to go out the window and see what fun was about to happen. Alpha and I stood by the window, looking out into the dark and quiet courtyard. I was curious and confused about Alpha's way of doing things, my heart rising with suspense and anticipation. After a while, Alpha whispered, "It all started." Then he motioned for me to stand aside to avoid being seen. I peered out through a small gap in the window. In the yard, I saw that my second great-grandfather was holding a small wooden box, acting very mysterious and strange. He left the box in the middle of the yard and quickly ran to the shrine room. He took the key, frantically unlocking the door at a very fast speed, as if he was carrying out a plan. Then he opened the door and quietly entered the room to hide. At this point, I seemed to have understood the matter. My second great-grandfather did this for some evil reason. I kept watching him and then looked down at the wooden box that was placed on the field. It started to move like there was something inside. Not stopping there, the great-grandfather's shrine room also began to emit very strange rustling sounds. A moment later, two arms with long sharp claws suddenly popped out. To be precise,
That was my great-grandfather. His face looked very scary with many pinholes. He jumped up like a zombie straight to his niece's room. Alpha and I silently stood in the back and watched everything happen. Before I could stop being surprised, Alpha took out a brush from his pocket and dabbed a red dot between my forehead and his. He enjoyably performed with some walking movements like a normal person. After that, the doll he made before also started to go out, following Alpha's instructions. At this time, a similar red dot appeared on the doll's forehead. Following the command, the doll went straight to the shrine room past my great-grandfather's body. Then it went inside the shrine room. The sound of my second great-grandfather's screams resounded with fear. I saw him run out quickly, followed by Alva's doll. He panicked and ran out of the house, forgetting to take the small box. Then Alpha pointed at the center of the doll's forehead to disconnect from it. I got angry, turned to Alva and asked him to chase after my second great-grandfather to get him to ask questions. But Alpha shook his head and stopped me. I looked at him in surprise. He said I didn't need to hurry. Just come and see what was inside the wooden box on the ground first. I obeyed him, crept forward and trembling opened the wooden box to check. I didn't expect there to be anything scary inside, but just an ordinary frog. Only its eyes were wide open and there were sharp needles on his head. I was surprised that before I could understand it, Alpha was standing behind me. He told me to try pulling the needle out of the frog's head. I was curious to try. I pulled out the needle. Blood splattered. At the same time, my great-grandfather howled again and spat out a puddle of water inside his mouth. Immediately my great-grandfather fell and lay stiff, motionless on the ground. Alpha and I also ran over to check it out and saw a bigger needle on top of his head. Alpha pulled out the needle and put my great-grandfather's mouth open wide. A frog suddenly popped out of his mouth. Then Alpha and I took my great-grandfather's body back to the coffin. I thought it was over, but unexpectedly Alpha told me another story. Alpha told me this was a very old method and my second great-grandfather was also plotting to harm the younger niece. As soon as Alpha finished his sentence, he asked me to run to the room of my great-grandfather's niece quickly. I told her about the whole thing that made her scared and hurt. After that, Alpha went to the place where a precious vase was displayed. He looked at it for a while, then confirmed that it was a truly precious artifact. I panicked, my mouth gaping open in astonishment when I learned the true value of these items. But Alpha said that some of the items were antiques in museums and were stolen a long time ago. The atmosphere in the room immediately became tense at Alpha's words. I also told Alpha that my great-grandfather most likely bought them from thieves. Alpha now turned to ask the granddaughter about the memento that my great-grandfather left her. She said the memento that my great-grandfather left her was not an antique at all, but just an ordinary pendant. Then she took off the necklace she was wearing around her neck and showed it to us. Looking closely at the shape, it looked a bit strange, similar to a petal. Alpha seemed to have realized something. He immediately carried his necklace straight ahead. He stood looking for something on the wooden cabinet for a long time. Then he gently put the pendant in the missing part of the cabinet. Unexpectedly, her pendant matched that missing part. Dust from the cabinet flew out and also opened a small drawer. Alpha hurriedly took out the item that was placed in the closet. It was an abacus made entirely out of famous gems. Alpha gave this abacus to the granddaughter and told her not to let it fall into the hands of my second great-grandfather. Finished, Alpha and I said goodbye to the young girl and left. Alpha's car rolled and took me home. On the way, Alpha took the coin from his pocket in the morning and gave it to me. I looked at him bewilderedly, listening to him talk about today's wages.
I thought he would pay me well, but I didn't expect it to be such a large amount. I screamed in panic, but Alpha didn't seem to mind. But that was okay because my great-grandfather's niece took care of this. Now I understood why magicians like Faye and Alpha were so rich. It was a beautiful day and I had a meeting with Faye at a small pub. I invited Faye this time actively, made him surprised and curious a little bit. "Why are you really excited to invite me today? Is there something wrong?" Faye asked. I assured him that it was only to enhance the beauty of our friendship. He smiled when he heard that. We raised our glasses. With a heavy heart, I prepared to discuss the main issue. Faye got his glass raised and put it in his mouth as he watched me. I began to recall my school days and told him many stories. But with Faye, he simply understood that I had something that I would like to ask for his assistance. While it was true that this was somewhat embarrassing to say, Faye was also very sensitive when he discovered my intentions. "What are you up to? Don't be shy. We are no longer strangers, right?" Faye said. I knew I couldn't hide from him, so I drank the rest of my drink to relax. I hesitated and then told Faye that I had just met the girlfriend I had broken up with 5 years ago. She came to see me with a lovely son who was already 8 years old. "Wow, don't tell me that baby is yours," Faye exclaimed, surprised. When I heard him say that, I pushed his silly and negative thoughts aside with denial. I continued the story. Her son and husband were both injured in a traffic accident, and the child had been in a coma for several months. When Faye heard that, he gave me a serious look and raised his hand to tell me to stop. "Should she go to see a doctor instead? Why was she coming with you?" I sighed and softly asked Faye to look into whether there was any other invisible reason why he couldn't wake up. Faye also thought for a long time before standing up, preparing some necessary items and calling me to accompany him to the hospital to see the boy. We took a taxi on the street and went directly to the central hospital. The ex-girlfriend from the hospital room greeted us. Then she escorted Faye and me into the hospital to check on the boy's condition. He was in a coma on the bed, motionless and hooked up to an oxygen machine, but his skin was still very ruddy. Faye got to work right away. He took a deep breath and slowly closed his eyes. After a while, Faye immediately opened his eyes, his face solemn and concerned. I only need to look at his face to know that something was wrong, so I turned to him and inquired the reason. However, Faye felt that talking in the hospital room was inconvenient, so he summoned my ex-girlfriend and me outside. I concernedly asked Faye what had happened. "So strange. I can no longer see the boy's soul inside his body," Faye stated. When the mother heard it, she became terrified. Faye then requested that my ex-girlfriend drive the two of us to the location of the accident. The car quickly drove away and came to a stop near the suburbs. We easily stopped the car for convenient observation because the road was quite deserted and there were only a few cars passing by. Faye had such a keen sense that he could pinpoint the location of the accident with a single glance around. After hearing that, I was curious as to know how he knew the location. Faye showed a cool and calm face, saying that he felt the dark energy of many evil spirits who had accidents on the stretch of road. My ex-girlfriend stood beside Faye, listening to everything he said, and choking as if she wanted to cry, admitting that everything Faye said was true. The day of the accident, the couple was on their way to take their son to his grandparents' house for the weekend, she recalled. Everyone in the car was having a good time, talking and playing. In a sudden, a truck traveling at high speed sped up to their vehicle. Fortunately, her husband was able to steer away from the truck in time, and the truck collided with the back of the car. She and her son in the back seat were hit hard by the impact. Their son was rendered unconscious as a result of what appeared to be a minor accident. Faye listened intently, as if he was waiting on some important information. Then he proceeded straight ahead. 3 of us fixed our gazes on the grass, as if looking for something. We noticed a large rock broken in 2 hidden behind the towering weeds. It was the only thing that drew me in and made me curious about the strange object. When I asked Faye about it, he replied,
"This is proof that the ghosts are here and are being held back by this stone."
The explanation sounded a little perplexing, so Faye agreed to meet with me tonight. He would help me in seeing the parallel world that existed here. Faye then drove my ex-girlfriend back to the hospital to take care of her son while I prepared for tonight's ceremony. He also told me that this was the most common method of summoning souls and that it was simple but very effective. That night, I sat in the car, nervously waiting for Faye to drive me back to the intersection we visited this morning. When he arrived, he hastily opened the trunk and struggled to find some items. Faye worked tirelessly to transport all of the prepared tools to the back of the truck. I stood beside Faye, admiring the strange charms and bells that Faye carried. Then he handed me a stack of paper coins and instructed me to scatter them on the street while he rang the bell to summon the boy's soul. We immediately stood in the middle of the intersection and took action. Faye called out the boy's name out loud as he continued to shake the resounding bells. At the same time, I was struggling to scatter fake banknotes on the street following Faye's voice. The bell rang evenly throughout the intersection, but Faye noticed nothing out of the ordinary. The paper coins that I had scattered were also still on the ground, not moving as they had before. So Faye came to a halt and asked me to assist him in collecting the coins that I had scattered on the street. Facing the failure of the first plan, Faye immediately started working on the second plan. I was surprised to see that Faye had prepared a backup plan. He reminded me the summoning soul method he had talked about earlier in the morning. At the time, I just remembered it, and that it was his main plan. Faye, on the other hand, hesitated. He was concerned about how dangerous it would be to carry out this ritual. I was afraid no one else would be able to do it if he couldn't. Aside from that, Faye required someone sharp enough to complete the ritual correctly and safely. I know Faye was worried in his heart. His eyes showed that he wanted to nominate me but was unsure. As a result, I strongly recommended myself. I thought he would refuse, but no. He took out the red thread that had been prepared and tied it to my finger, telling me not to lose it. I had no idea what was going on when Faye in a sudden took out a piece of red fabric to cover my eyes and led me to the center of the intersection. A cold wind blew up from the ground, coiling around my body like a tornado. In my suspense, I kept hearing Faye's voice telling me to find the boy quickly before he and I are trapped here forever. Then Faye's voice vanished. Instead, there were horrifying roars coming from in front of me. All around me were wandering ghosts who appeared to be so frightening. I approached slowly. There were many ghosts around me, possibly because they died in a car accident and their bodies were not recovered. I had the sensation of stepping on cold, squishy, muddy ground. I was shivering because the air was so cold here. I mingled with the crowd, pretending to be them as well. It was so heavy that I felt like I was going to burn out. I attempted to walk while still clutching the red thread, but then the red thread vibrated and I awoke, confused. When I look back, I realized that these scenes were completely real, not an imagination that I created while wearing the red blindfold. The people in front of me were not ordinary living people, but actual ghosts. Looking ahead, I noticed the boy. I finally found his soul, which had been wandering ahead. I hurriedly pursued the boy, passing many other frightening souls. Because he was so terrified by the accident, the spirit of the other boy had escaped from the body and was walking on this road unconsciously right now. When I caught up to the boy, I put my hand on his shoulder and called his name, but his head turned back to look at me. It looked so frightening. I was startled by the boy's scary, ghostly face and quickly let go of his shoulder. He wasn't the boy I was looking for, but the real trouble began when my actions drew the attention of the spirits around. They rushed over to me and encircled me. Only now I realized what horror was. There were frightening ghosts in front of me, reaching out their hands to pounce on me. I struggled, trying to push these ghosts away, but they grew in number. A ghost dashed over, grabbed my arm and dragged me towards him. At that precise moment, distant sparks flew to attack those ghosts, assisting me in escaping their encirclement. So, seizing the opportunity, I dashed away, then joined the crowd again. I knew I didn't have much time left and I needed to find the boy as soon as possible. Fortunately, in the fog, I noticed a boy crying while walking. The figure also appeared to be very familiar. At first, I was a little skeptical, but when I looked at his ruddy skin, I realized he was not a ghost. I was overjoyed and about to run to him when I was stopped by the red thread on my finger. I ran as fast as I could to the boy, but I had to be careful not to lose the red thread if I didn't want to stay here forever. The more I ran, the tighter the thread became and the more I was drawn back. I looked helplessly in the boy's direction, noticing a large, bright blue puddle just a few feet away. I was aware of the situation's urgency, so I ventured to call out the boy's name loudly in order to wake him up. The boy jumped and turned to look at me, his eyes welling up with tears as soon as he heard his name. I was overjoyed when I realized it was the person I was looking for and waved my hand for him to come over to me. I dashed over to the boy as quickly as I could. When the boy realized I was a real person, he tried to flee but was stopped by two ghosts behind him. That dangerous and urgent scene perplexed me as I tried to unravel the red thread so I could flee to save the boy. After some deliberation, I decided to take the risk and remove the red thread, then rushed to rescue the boy from the clutches of the demons. "Here I am! Your mother asked me to come pick you up, let's go!" After saying that, I clutched the boy's hand tightly and returned to the old path to find my way back. But the situation became worse when the red thread vanished. With the current situation, I could only go with my gut instinct. I didn't dare to tell him about my current situation for fear of causing him more panic and anxiety, so I silently led him back to the old path through the dense fog. I was trying to figure out how to contact Faye right now in order to find a solution. All of a sudden I heard a dog barking next to me. I happily looked in the direction of the bark and happened to see a rather large dog with red thread in its mouth. As soon as he saw the dog, the boy exclaimed, "This dog is my lost dog from a long time ago." So as soon as I got the red thread, the boy and I followed it. I finally heard Faye's voice after a while. When I opened my eyes, I noticed Faye tugging at the red scarf that was covering my eyes. I looked befuddled at Faye and then around, but the boy was no longer standing next to me, which confused me greatly. "Don't worry, the boy's soul has already been deposited in a mirror," Faye said. Hearing Faye say that, I sighed and sat down on the ground, gasping for breath after a long adventure. After cleaning up the mess, Faye and I decided to drive back to the hospital. I sat in Faye's car and pondered, then turned to Faye and asked him why he had chose me for this dangerous task. Faye burst out laughing when he heard my question. He stated that it was a test he wanted to give me in order for me to demonstrate my abilities. I was reminded of the first time I worked with Faye. Indeed, I believe I have matured significantly. After that day, the child gradually regained consciousness and recovered very quickly, much to the delight of the parents and the surprise of the doctors. People might think it was a miracle for those who didn't know about me and Faye. This morning, I had an appointment with Faye to go with him to a residential area not far from me. This time, a girl found my service to ask for help. The girl invited us into her house and started her story. She told us she was a single mother and lived with her son. Faye and I focused on listening. The girl said she had just moved in and had experienced many strange phenomena in this apartment a month ago. She accidentally found out about this apartment through a real estate post on the internet. The realtor brought the mother and son into the apartment to visit and look around. The realtor confidently introduced her. This was the best and cheapest apartment in this area. When the door was opened, space inside was a completely different world filled with available children's toys. The child who saw the toys in front of his eyes excitedly ran over. When she was about to run to hug her son, the realtor told her to let the boy play freely. The realtor told her that the owner of this house was a person who loved children, so he bought many toys. While her son was playing carefree outside, the realtor offered to take her inside to take a tour of the bedroom. First, the realtor showed her through the bedroom, which was quite clean and tidy. The realtor also told her that there was also a small bedroom for the children next to his room. She couldn't miss this apartment because the design was both convenient and modern, and the rent was very cheap. When she and the realtor returned to the living room, she looked for her son, but he was nowhere to be found. She was a little uneasy, immediately called out her son's name and looked for him everywhere. Suddenly, she looked down at her feet and saw a toy ball rolling from a nearby room. She looked at the ball and then looked at the room behind her, suddenly feeling a little afraid. She slowly walked to the other room. It was the children's room that the realtor talked about earlier. She took a few steps into the room when she suddenly heard her son's voice behind her. She turned around and saw the son standing behind her. He also seemed to like this apartment very much. After that, she did not hesitate to rent this apartment and quickly moved here to live with her son. But since she and her son moved into this apartment, her family had encountered many strange phenomena. Her son always ran up to her with a grimace on his face, asking her about his constantly lost toys. At first, she didn't pay much attention to this because she thought he misplaced them somewhere. After the mother and son spent all day looking for, but still had no results, the son was resentful and went back to his room. At night, the mother was woken up and slowly walked from her room to the bathroom. As soon as she opened the door, she suddenly saw a strange scene. A shadowy figure appeared behind the bathroom door. With the flickering light of the room, she thought it was her son. But strangely, the shadow stood still behind the door, not moving. So she decided to open the bathroom door, but there was no one inside. She felt extremely confused, so she turned to her son's room. She slowly walked over, slowly opened the door to the room, and went inside to check it out. Inside the room, the son was still sleeping comfortably on the large bed without knowing anything. so she walked over and gently pulled the blanket up for her son. After checking on her son, she quietly went out, still feeling strange about what just happened. But the culmination of the incident must be the strange phenomenon that the mother and son accidentally encountered yesterday. After going out with her son, she opened the door and went inside with her son. In the middle of the room, she saw a strange-looking boy about the same age as her son, playing on the swing in the house. She thought he was the son of someone who got lost. So she ran to him, but when she approached, the boy was gone. Then there was a sound of a ball rolling on the floor, dragging the ball into her son's bedroom. The mother felt that something was wrong and hurriedly chased the shadow to see what it was. When she ran into the room, she saw a figure rushing into the closet and gently closing the door to hide. She looked at the white small hand that was creeping through the gap in the door in front of her and gave a shiver. She mustered her courage, ran to the closet, hurriedly opened the door and looked inside. But strangely enough, that boy was gone. She looked in every nook and cranny of the closet, checking it thoroughly, but there was nothing. Her son, standing next to her, also accidentally witnessed everything. He burst into tears in fear and told her that he often got his toys taken by the other boy. At this point, she panicked when she realized all this time her son had been exposed to the strange thing she had just witnessed earlier. She told us the story, and her face still couldn't hide the fear. Hearing the story, Faye immediately said, "In your house, there must be a demon child." The mother worriedly asked Faye and told him to show her how to deal with this. Faye was very calm, as if knowing how to solve the story was simpler than turning his hand. He told the mother to spread the white powder around the house and lead them into the son's bedroom. Then they should go out. I always found it difficult to understand Faye's ways. In the afternoon, I received a phone call from Faye. He called me to quickly come to the mother and son's apartment to check. When I ran to the place, I saw Faye and this woman standing in front of the room. The woman's gaze could not hide her surprise. I also curiously walked over to stand next to Faye and look inside. I exclaimed in panic, deliberately rubbing my eyes to see better. But unexpectedly on the floor there were many strange traces. Many footprints walked back and forth in the house from the outside leading into the son's room. If they looked closely, those were the footprints of children. I began to tremble at this horrible case, hesitant to go inside. But Faye was so natural and didn't seem to have any feelings towards those footprints. Just as Faye and I had predicted, this footprint stretched from the living room to her son's room and straight to an object. Footprints would stop when walking to the closet door. Faye and I looked at each other. Then Faye asked me to push this huge closet aside to see the strange thing. This closet was quite heavy. When I pushed the closet over a bit, a big square revealed behind it. Faye told me this was an altar. On the altar was a golden doll surrounded by the lost son's toys. Faye told me and the mother and son standing below that this doll was a demon child because the apartment's owner had left it in the room to attract fortune. The realtor said that the owner was a person who liked children and was to lure the children to come here and suck their yang kui. After hearing this, the mother trembled, asking Faye to show her and her son how to solve it. He smiled coldly and said, "Please take the black tape to cover the eyes and mouth of the doll for me." In this way, the soul in the doll would not see her son and would not be able to eat anything. Within a month, the soul would disappear. After that, I waited until the woman finished following Faye's instructions. Then I helped her push the closet back to its place. In the end, the two of us said goodbye to mother and son and left. Later, the woman contacted me again. She called the realtor to tell the story of the demon child in the apartment and was compensated a good amount of money. This was the story Faye told me. That day, he had a date with an old acquaintance named Tani. The two met at the cafe. When Faye arrived, he saw Tani waiting there. Faye thought he was late, so he took the initiative to apologize to Tani. Tani looked at his watch and said Faye arrived at the exact time, not a minute late. It was just that Tani came early because he was so impatient. Faye immediately asked Tani about what was happening at Tani's house. Tani lit a cigarette and started talking. This story happened to his mother. Because he was not too close to Tani, Faye didn't know about Tani's family. According to Tani, he had a younger brother. The two brothers were more than 10 years apart because his mother gave birth to a younger brother when she was old. When they were young, they used to fight often. Sometimes they also quarreled over toys. At such times, Tani was always blamed because every time his younger brother cried, his mother also advocated. The younger brother was very stubborn from a young age. Despite his bad grades in school, he was always pampered by his mother. Growing up, he dropped out of high school and wandered around with his gangster friends, refusing to come home. Even when his mother was sick, Tani went to his younger brother to call him to visit their mother. But Tani's younger brother still refused to turn home. For him, friends outside were better than family. Tani tried to stop him, but Tani's younger brother only hated Tani more. He even said bad things to Tani. After that, he turned his back and left. That made Tani even more angry with his younger brother. And in the heat of the moment, Tani inadvertently asked the younger brother why he didn't die, so that his mother's suffering could be reduced. But Tani himself did not expect that day would be the last time Tani met his younger brother because his unintentional words came true. That night, the younger brother got into a fight with thugs at the pub. One of the thugs used a large beer bottle to hit Tani's brother over the head. When Tani arrived, his younger brother's friends all ran away. They left him alone on the ground and lost too much blood. Because of the loss of blood and the delay in emergency care, the younger brother did not survive. Tani couldn't believe this was real. Lying on the hospital bed, the younger brother used the last of his strength, grabbing Tani's shirt. He started crying and weakly said something that Tani couldn't hear. Finally, the younger brother passed away that day. After the funeral, Tani's mother was heartbroken. No matter what the younger brother was like, Tani's mother still loved him. That night, when Tani came home from work and saw his mother sleeping, he did not dare to disturb his mother and went to his room. In the middle of the night, Tani's mother heard the younger brother knocking on the door. His cry was so pitiful and painful, so she went to the door to check it out. As soon as she opened the door, the younger brother was already standing at the door. He looked at his mother with a sad face. She also cried a lot. The younger brother lamented that he wanted to go inside to visit his mother but couldn't get through the door. He could only stand outside the door and call his mother. As soon as he finished his sentence, he turned and walked away. The mother painfully chased after him but couldn't. At that time, she also woke up and shouted loudly for her younger son not to go. Tani heard her mother's voice and rushed to check it out. She sat up and ran quickly to the door, always saying that her son was back. But she ran to the door and saw no one. Tani asked, and she told her dream. Tani comforted her a lot, but to no avail. She still thought that her son told her in a dream, so she refused to sleep, determined to sit in the chair in front of the door to wait for her son. Despite Tani's words, she still wanted to sit and wait. She also refused to close the door, saying that she was afraid that it would be closed and her son couldn't enter the house. And Tani went to Faye to ask for his help. Otherwise, Tani's mother would be sick because of grief. Faye looked at Tani and asked,
Recently, have you been looking for someone to change your luck?
That question confused Tani a bit, and he didn't understand why Faye knew. Faye just said that the paper couldn't wrap fire. Faye told Tani to face it. Then Faye stood up and told Tani to take him home to meet Tani's mother. In the car, Faye actively talked about strange things about changing luck and how to prevent someone from entering the house. Tani was just silent at the moment, but his expression revealed a sinister expression. The house where Tani lived was a high-class area. It seemed that Tani's business was very favorable. Arriving at the house, Tani introduced his mother to Faye. It seemed that Tani talked about Faye with his mother before. So when she met Faye, she cried and asked Faye to help her youngest son. Contrary to Tani's expectations, Faye frankly said that the youngest son's soul could not enter the house because there was something stopping him. After saying that, Faye looked around the house to look for this something. Finally, Faye pointed at the table near the door. Then Faye didn't explain quickly but went to the table. He crouched under the table to check. And just as Faye had predicted in his mind, underneath the table was a small knife stuck there. Faye took out the knife and gave it to the mother. She wondered who left the knife there. Faye glanced at Tani to see how he would respond to his mother. Tani admitted that he had put the knife there, but Tani claimed that the shaman said the knife was only used to make business better, not saying it would prevent his brother's spirit from entering the house. Faye took the knife and said that Tani must have been tricked because this short knife could never help others get rich. Faye then told Tani's mother to wrap the knife in red cloth and take it out of the house. The youngest son would be able to enter the house. Hearing this, she was very happy and thanked Faye, but Tani didn't seem to agree. He told his mother to forget about it. That made the mother angry and she howled back at Tani. Seeing that Faye stood up to make peace, Faye said that the youngest son just wanted to see his mother one last time and then left. Even so, Tani was still very upset. He wanted Faye to make sure that the younger brother wouldn't say anything to scare his mother. Faye said that the younger brother passed away recently and was now just a spirit who might not even be able to speak. Tani finally agreed. That night, Faye also helped Tani's mother see her son. Faye smeared the family water on Tani's mother's forehead. This was the kind of water he used to help ordinary people see ghosts. That night the mother slept as usual. At midnight the room door slowly opened. The sound of the door woke her up. She felt someone was entering the room. The cold air began to spread. The youngest son knelt on the ground next to the bed, whispering sorry to his mother. He couldn't seem to say anything other than apologizing to his mother. The mother was afraid that her son's soul could not be able to be liberated safely, so she gritted her teeth and endured, not looking back at her son. Finally, the son stood up and turned away. The mother also choked. As soon as the son left, the mother immediately rushed to the door to see him one last time. Standing at the door, she saw her son's soul slowly disappear without a word, until his shadow disappeared from the corridor. The mother cried out in agony until her throat was hoarse. Then she was exhausted and collapsed. Tani was in time to save his mother from falling. Faye then told Tani to let her rest. His younger brother wouldn't come back. Before leaving, Faye still didn't forget to tell Tani that he should tell his mother the truth. He couldn't just hide it forever. Telling the story to me, Faye told me the truth. Tani used his younger brother to change his luck, helping him to have more success and luck, and his younger brother was getting more and more unlucky. That indirectly damaged his younger brother's life, and he died early. Faye and I had an appointment with a girl early on the weekend. She was having a serious problem. Her face was filled with fear, and her eyes were tearing up as if she wanted to cry. Faye quickly comforted and reassured the girl, saying,
"Calm down and tell me everything. Trust me."
I also consoled her, gave her a glass of water and told her that Faye was very talented and could handle anything. The girl sat for a while, thinking and then trembling, saying she used to have a happy family, but after saying that, she burst into tears and her tears fell on the glass of water on the table. Early in the morning, as usual, her husband was on his way to work, so he would take his son to school. She went out to see them off. She felt very happy because she had a fulfilling family life. She stood motionless and watched the car until the car disappeared. The car raced through each lane of the highway straight to the boy's school. The boy sat quietly in the car playing with his phone while the husband leisurely focused on driving. At the intersection, the signal light turned yellow. Because he didn't pay any attention to the signal, the car went overboard, so the husband let the car pass. However, the big truck from across the street sped by, and everything happened far too quickly. The impact was very severe. Both vehicles were then filled with black smoke, and the husband's car was completely overturned. Fortunately, the husband was not seriously injured, but when he looked at his son, he realized the situation was terrible. It was too late. The boy was gone, and she painfully blamed her husband for why he let the incident happen. After her son died, she suffered as if she were dead, and she had to relocate to another location to avoid her husband for a while in order to gradually regain her spirit. But she appeared to have changed into a different person since then, with very strange actions. She went to the market every day to buy roosters to take home on a regular basis, surprising everyone. People frequently looked at her with strange eyes, as if she was not normal. Her entire skin was white, her eyes were dark, and her figure was taciturn and heavy. She immediately placed a raw chicken on the cutting board and took out a big cleaver after bringing it home. She slammed her hand down, beating the blade straight into the animal's neck. Her eyes sparkled with satisfaction as the blood from the chicken's neck splashed onto her face. The most terrifying part was that after killing the chicken, she took it and went straight out. She stood in front of a glass door, drawing some red blood lines on it with the chicken's neck as a pen. Then she stood in front of the mirror, looked in it, and cried while calling out her son's name. However, after a long time, the mirror began to show a reflection of someone. In front of her appeared a tall black shadow, as black as smoke. She thought it was her son, so she burst into tears. However, after a while, the black shadow transformed into a strange man. She was taken aback and quickly took a step back. But the real horror happened when the man in the mirror began to move and wanted to rush towards her. He put his hands out through the mirror. He was as big as a giant. His body looked like a butcher. He grabbed her neck with his big hand and squeezed it so hard that she couldn't resist. She clenched her teeth, attempting to resist. Then he came out from the mirror, manifested himself to be a demon. She unintentionally fell backwards while fighting him. She snatched the wooden chair next to her and gripped it tightly. Then she smacked him with the chair. The chair also accidentally slammed into the glass so hard that the entire glass broke. Mirror shards were scattered all around her and she collapsed to the floor. She leaned against the bed while seeing human hands appearing in the broken mirror on the floor. She screamed in terror and ran out of the room immediately. She told us everything in tears and terror, pleading with us to help her. I felt a little spine chilling after hearing the story, and Faye's face began to tense. After that, I assisted Faye in transporting the tools to the girl's house. At the time, Faye brought some mirrors and strange talismans. We walked a short distance to the girl's house. Once inside, Faye brought out the talismans he had prepared and instructed me to place the mirror in each of the 4 corners of the room. Then he threw the golden talisman into the house to cast a spell. A cold wind blew in from outside and passed through me, causing the hairs on the back of my neck to shiver. After a while, Faye told me to adjust the mirrors so that they could absorb light and create a human reflection on the wall. Then, following Faye's instructions, I attempted to bring a large mirror to hang in the window. I finally finished after a long struggle and went inside to await the outcome of the matter. I stood outside the room where the incident occurred and looked inside, noting that Faye appeared to have begun casting spells as well. He stood in front of the large broken mirror, raised 2 fingers to the sky and began reciting the mantra. He pointed straight ahead and shouted loudly after reciting the mantra. As soon as the action was over, the mirror made a few earthquake-like shaking sounds and a puff of black smoke appeared. The smoke was so big, it looked both frightening and strange as it flew around the room. The black smoke swirling around the 4 walls was blocked by the mirrors, causing it to collide with objects in the house. The black shadow then flew straight into the wall and appeared on it. I wanted to rush over to see what the hell the black shadow was, but Faye stopped me. As Faye predicted, the black shadow gradually changed and shrunk after a while. Then on the white wall an image of a black person appeared. It got smaller, then bigger, then stopped after a while. Faye just breathed a sigh of relief, now showing a familiar smile every time he completed his mission. After witnessing Faye's magic, the girl became concerned and approached Faye to listen to his instructions. Faye and I left after advising the girl to repaint the wall, but as soon as we turned away, I heard the girl's voice call out again. She burst into tears and walked over to Faye to thank him and asked the 2 of us to assist her in reuniting with her deceased son. I seemed to want to refuse because it was really a difficult and impossible thing to do. The girl who received the rejection said nothing else, but she cried helplessly, putting Faye and myself in an awkward situation. I expected Faye to refuse the girl's request, but he unexpectedly smiled and nodded, agreeing to assist the girl in reuniting with her child. Faye took a basin of water and cast a spell with a golden talisman. The girl was standing behind him, nervously breathing heavily. Then he pointed 2 fingers into the basin of water and turned the talisman in a large circle. After only a few turns, a black shadow appeared beneath the water in the same manner as the girl had done. Then, in the reflection of the basin of water, a boy appeared, and it was her deceased son. The young girl burst into tears of happiness when she saw her son for the last time. After that, Faye and I both quickly left. After we got out, I discovered that the girl used necromancy on a deep web. Actually, the method wasn't entirely wrong, but it ran the risk of summoning the evil spirits. On the way, I asked Faye if the magic floating around the internet worked. Faye laughed and said,
There are also things that work, but it's best not to try them if you don't know what they are.